Welcome. In this video, I had the privilege of interviewing Keri Laine. Keri is the CEO of Keri Laine Executive Solutions, a firm that melds the intricacies of people, talent, and culture with mergers and acquisitions. The firm provides the frameworks for success, advanced human capital analytics, leadership strategies, and cutting-edge technology to help founders and investors drive greater value faster than they could on their own. Her reputation as a global business strategist is anchored in an unwavering commitment to driving industry disruptive organizations to unparalleled success. Over the course of her career, Keri has occupied pivotal C-level roles across diverse sectors, both public and private. Her specialization over the past 15 years, assisting entities on an international scale and reshaping their sectors through people, innovation, and entrepreneurial spirit. Under Keri's leadership, organizations have witnessed transformative growth, scaling employee strength from 100 to 4,000, while navigating revenue milestones that span 40 million to an impressive 5.6 billion. That's with a B. With dozens of global M&A ventures integrated under her leadership, Keri's approach uniquely brings together the nuances of talent and human capital management with holistic business integration. Keri's fervor for people, leadership, and culture development remains the cornerstone of the firm's ethos. As an educator, she imparts MBA courses at Rollins College and facilitates leadership modules tailored for top-tier professionals, infusing future leaders with her vast knowledge. A recognized thought leader, Keri's insights resonate at global conferences and within esteemed industry publications. Beyond her professional engagements, she is the proud founder of Working Moms Work Together, a global initiative designed to bolster working mothers across the world, and a single mom to two young superhero boys of her own. Keri's academic background encompasses a master's in human resource management and a bachelor's in organizational behavior from Rollins College. Additionally, she's a certified executive coach and holds a change management certification. She is the founder of an up-and-coming AI and machine learning platform to be released out of stealth mode in the coming months. Really excited for that. Keri is undoubtedly a wealth of knowledge and inspiration. I really enjoyed my conversation with Keri, and I encourage you to hear what she has to say. It is a game changer. So without further ado, I give you Keri Laine. And we're live.
We're
Keri,
live.
it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for connecting with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this. Since our first conversation, I left feeling inspired and realized that you're a wealth of insight and knowledge.
Oh, thank you.
From the outside looking in, for someone who has never started a business or is looking at starting a new project, it can be daunting, intimidating, can look like a journey of 1,000 miles. And to see someone who has gone down that path and has summited multiple times, it can be both inspiring but also mystifying. That person can even seem like they have superpowers. I would certainly position you within that camp of a superhero entrepreneur, business owner, CEO. And if the Marvel films over the last decade has taught us anything, it's that every superhero has an origin story, that they've had to overcome challenges, they've had to build a character, and they live their life by a set of principles more often than not. So what I'd love to do is premise this conversation with the origin story within a professional context, where it all began for you and how it brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I think about this often. Is it nature versus nurture? And I often think that in the professional realm, we are still whole people. Who we are is who we are inside and out, from the beginning to the end, and who we show up every day has much to do with personally who we are as much as professionally who we are. And I tell people that under 5, you live in a state of subconsciousness. And all of us have had a moment under 5 where something has happened that was some kind of threat to our security or our what we perceive to be existence. And at that age, we're very egocentric. We are looking at, we're being fed, we're being, we have shelter, we have hopefully loving parents, and it's a very all about me world. So when that security event happens, it could be being chased by a dog, it could be a power outage and you can't, parents can't find candles for the lights. It could be something as simple as that. But in that story, we tell ourselves something that stays with us for life. And I call it the loop. And it gets buried in our subconscious. And I've had to do a lot of work to figure out what my loop was. And I think that for me is where it all started. So it is personal because I was 5, but it birthed this loop for me that is something that I've had to work through both in a way that hurts and a way that helps. And I think that once people understand the loop, they understand how to unlock some of that superpowerness, as you call it. So I'll just give you mine really quick. I was 5 and I was under a table and it was sunset. My brother and I were reading the ABC book and he had his hands on my ears. And I remember thinking, I can't hear you when you're reading this book to me and your hands are sticky. And why is it getting dark out? And I should be going to bed soon. And I remember looking up back in the window through the kitchen and I saw my parents arguing. And it wasn't anything like crazy or dramatic. I just remember thinking, if they love me enough, they'd know it's time to go to bed. And my loop became, am I enough? And I didn't realize this until many, many years later, actually, until after I got divorced and I did some of that inner work to realize why we make the choices we make and how do we become who we are. And I noticed that many of the decisions in life that I've made started with that am I enough factor. And it was either validation of I'm going to work so hard to prove I'm enough, or it was insecurities that drove, I'm not sure I'm enough. I'm not sure if I can do this or not. And so on either edge of it, it's given me some kind of inner drive that I think when I look back, the decisions that I've made personally and professionally were rooted from that. And I'm very grateful for knowing it. I'm also very grateful for having it, whatever it translates to be for us all in life, but we all have one. And that was mine starting out. And so I think that is likely where the origin began from the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that. I like the framing of the loop. And I can see myself going down the rabbit hole of inquiry, self-inquiry to find my own.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of work because it's buried in there real deep. But once I heard it in my head, I remember it's, you go through this highway hypnosis in a way when you're driving. And I remember being at a stoplight and it hit me. And I had done all this work to try to figure it out. I had listened to podcasts and meditated and gone on long walks and journaled. And when it hit me, I was immediately 5 again, because the subconscious knows no time and it knows no difference from one event to the next. And I remember when it hit me, I felt like I got literally rear-ended and I immediately got teary-eyed and goosebumps. And I was like, that's my loop. And suddenly so many things made sense. And it is, I think, how I've achieved as much as I've achieved. And a lot of people, like you give the perception of on the outside, it looks like sometimes an overnight success, or it looks like it's really hard for people to attain. And I think when we're driven by something that's bigger than us or deep within us, you just move through because you're compelled to it, whatever it may be. And so I would actually encourage you to dig. And once you figure yours out, I'd love to know what it is.
You got it. Deal. When, how long did you go and as an adult in your career before reaching that point where you could kind of tangibly identify that loop? And what was the shift like for you before and after, knowing that internal driver versus kind of just being driven by it?
Yeah. I figured it out probably about 2 years ago. So I was well into having taken many companies public, done M&A all over the world after I'd gotten my master's. I think I also told you at one point, excuse me, I had dropped out of high school. And so going from a high school dropout and turning into a master's degree, straight A student that was president of all kinds of campus events, turning that into the career that I've had, it has been a shift that I wasn't conscious of until after I got divorced, because I wanted to understand why I made the decisions that I made so that I could work through what it would mean to be a single working mom. And I wanted to understand how to make better decisions for my life moving forward, whether it be how to show up as a better parent, how to show up as a better, employee or a better leader, or frankly, a better picker of whoever might be next in my life. And so I think the idea of I need to figure this out was what drove that. And it was about 2 years ago that it hit me, but it took about 2 years to figure out from the point in which this question was posed to me. I look back at my mom kept a journal of me growing up, and she gifted it to me on my 18th birthday. And on my 5th birthday, she wrote me a poem. And there's a line in there that talks about how I blow past the boundaries on my bike. And she's like, in the poem, it's far more articulated than this, but she says, we've set those boundaries 1,000 times. And I don't know even if then there was something in me trying to prove that I could make it past the line and back, and I'd still be just fine. And so I can see tenets of that characteristic trait. I mean, even think dropping out of high school was a entrepreneurial decision. It was one of the first of swimming upstream. It was very unconventional. It was something that I had to sell to people to believe in, to believe that I still would be enough and I would figure it out. Because I didn't want to be, just a high school dropout and do nothing. I actually wanted to drop out so I could go work full time. And I remember the day I told my mom, she said, I support you, but know your plan. Excuse me. And so I said, okay, I will come up with a plan. And it's not lost on me that now what I do for CEOs and founders and for the firms that we work with on the investment side is I help them come up with their plans. So I don't know if that kind of helps with the shift aspect, but I know once I realized what my loop was, I was able to identify how I approach situations with a lot more clarity, and I could feel it. I could feel it coming. And so if I was in a meeting and it was more of an intense meeting, I would be able to check my responses, and I would be able to almost watch myself more and know my inner drivers and how I would respond to things because of it. So I think in that vein, it helped me with clarity and how I showed up as my best self to certain situations in leadership and challenging meetings and keynote presentations. And I also think that it became a checkpoint of, if I wanted to do something, why was I doing it? And was I doing it for the right reasons, or was I doing it to prove something? And if I was doing it to try to prove something, was my intent pure? And was I doing it with all the facts and data? And it's a phrase you and people that work around me quite a bit hear me say is, are you going into this, whatever this is, eyes wide open and heart full? And that means with all of your facts and data in front of you and the purest of intentions and ethics. And so I think that line of thinking, adding this to that clarification point, has just helped me make better decisions and show up more as my authentic self for all the things that I choose to do. So.
Wow. Thank you for breaking that down. There's an anchor point that you're breaking down, which happened about 2 years ago. And this is that highway hypnosis moment after a great deal of searching, long walks, meditation, journaling, trying to find it. After the initial idea was posed to you, you came to that kind of cathartic moment where it became very clear to you. It brought you back to when you were 5 years old, into that moment. And I saw how the loop was started and how it was a driver over the years. And it has framed the perspective you take as a leader and as a high performer since then. So to decompose the story even further before we push ahead in the timeline, there was a lot that occurred between that point of a 5-year-old with her brother's sticky hands over her ears to that moment 2 years ago, starting and scaling many organizations, to name a few. So if the cathartic moment of identifying your loop is that top of the pyramid, perhaps it's not the right way to characterize it, but I'm curious what lessons you learned and had challenges you had to overcome as you went from that place of dropping out in high school to pursue full-time work to then straight A's and top of the class high performer through to that 2 years ago point.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because one of the reasons I chose to go full-time to work was because in high school, I didn't have the best grades. I wasn't very social, which is crazy if you knew me now. I love events, and I'm a very extroverted person. And so I think what was going on in high school was I didn't feel enough, and I wasn't feeling like I fit in, and I wasn't feeling like a sense of belonging, and I didn't know what to do with it. And the only answer in my mind was to do something more productive and do something that would be meaningful and more impactful that I could really connect to. And so it's funny how that am I enough was a no on one hand, but I knew I was enough to go ahead and step out into the workforce. And that's where I was saying from the beginning, those loops can drive, and whether they're a blessing or a curse, they drive certain elements and decisions. And as I went forward throughout my career, there was a time where I was in my master's program and I had just started at a company. I was part of HR, but that really was recruiting and a little bit of training and development. It was a 100-person company at the time. And as I was getting more educated on what a fully functioning HR department could do, I realized that it was so much more powerful than the organization had embraced. And so I did a gap analysis of the entire HR function, and I asked to have a meeting with the CEO, and I didn't have a relationship with the CEO yet at this point. And I gave this big gap analysis presentation, and I was terrified. It was terrified. It was my first like real engagement with a CEO. And I remember telling my mom on the way to work that morning I was going to do this, and she's like, you know, you're going to get fired if you do this whole thing, right? Because at the end of the presentation, when I outlined the risks of us not being able to accomplish this fully functioning HR department, he was listed on there as a risk. And the summation and conclusion was, if you only think that HR is payroll and benefits, then this entire plan goes away. And I knew at that moment I might have gone away too, but I knew in my head that also if he didn't believe in that or wouldn't have come around to believe in it and support it, then I wouldn't have wanted to work there anymore anyway, because I believed that the function could be enough. And I remember standing there like shaking, trying to hide it. And he sat back and he said, he didn't say anything for a few minutes. And he said, you're right. And I ended up having one of the best times of my career. We grew from 100 employees to a few thousand in less than 3 years. We were bought by Hewlett Packard. And that's really where I learned how to take the HR function and create it as a true value driver. And without that conversation, I would not have been able to play so much with the structure of it and turning it into such a value creation for the organization, to the point where we were the lead presentation for investor meetings and some of our biggest customer meetings. Because our talent function was such a differentiator from our competitors, it became the driving force for us to be so successful. And so once I knew that that type and model of building an HR function from the ground up was more than enough, staying on the theme, that became my career. And it was a, multiple time over working with organizations to structure to scale. And I think that what I fell in love with was proving that not only are people and the talent function enough, but that it is a driving force. And as I grew into C-level roles and some of the board positions and seeing things from the investor side, eventually I realized that this is something that's not talked about enough. And that if somebody was able to bring forward the message and the value of what people in an organization can bring, and I don't just mean like singing Kumbaya by the campfire and everybody's, happy employees. I mean, if you truly can turn it into a business driver, that became a mission for me, was to go into a space that didn't often talk about this, and knew that I would be able to have the courage and the fortitude to be able to convince others and educate others that this was the right way. And so I think that not just the right way, but a truly value driving way for businesses, founders, and investors. But back to some of the interesting parts of the way life unfolds, I was in the middle of taking the second company that went public. We were just a few months before IPO, and anybody that has done that knows how absolutely hectic that time is. We had offices all over the world. I was running a integration with an office in Sweden, and I also had two very small children, and about 1.5 and about 3.5. And this is also about the time that my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and it was also the time that I knew that I would be getting divorced. And I remember also, by the way, my stepdad died, my grandfather died, all within the same, 6 to 8 months. And I remember thinking at one point, there was not a 24-hour period that didn't hit without some kind of tragic news, whether it was from, work and the IPO side, whether it was from dad and, chemo treatment that didn't go well, whether it was from getting the phone call that my stepdad had passed away, whether it was from getting the phone call asking to plan my stepdad's and speak at his funeral. All of this was going on while I have lawyers on the background with, going through the divorce proceedings. trying to figure out for the first time how to be a single mom. And I remember thinking, I can't handle any of this. And it was in those moments where I sat back and said, you know that you are enough, and you wouldn't have had all of this happen at one time if you couldn't figure out the way through. And so I think that goes back to, I know I'm harping on the loop a lot, but I think the internal drivers are so big for these pivotal moments in life, because I could have, and I look back sometimes now and read journal entries, and I don't know how I didn't absolutely crack or crumble or fall apart or just completely stop everything and throw my hands up and say, I'm out, this is too much, because looking back, it was too much. But I think finding the ways through it, and then going into the decision of opening my own firm, which is a whole separate story. I think that is some of those more highlighting moments or moments of needing to overcome that are part of the journey. And I think that is maybe part of what your question might be going back to, is how that loop and how those decisions tie into day-to-day and career moves that we make throughout life.
Something I think would probably align with is that entrepreneurs tend to have a characteristic of a bias towards action, of pressing in with incomplete information. And a mental image that comes to mind, Keri, is standing on a diving board. Everyone knows that feeling, first couple of times before you jump off, that questioning if that's the right thing to do, especially if you're on the high dive. And then there's this like leaning into that feeling, or God forbid, backing away from it and climbing down in disgrace from the high dive. But the leaning into it sense of a high dive, and once you make that leap, it's gravity takes over. Momentum of the action is kind of unstoppable. As you shared the moment in time when you were an HR leader and you conducted the gap analysis, and you made the decision to pitch that to the CEO, first time doing something like that, especially considering that the risk factor, one of the risks at the end, was the CEO himself. And I wonder if you could take just a few additional minutes to break down the moment in time that you were in, even hearing your own mother say, this could result in a negative outcome. And it sounds like you had not just a moral compass that was aligning you, saying, look, even if it is the end of the road for me here, I wouldn't want to be here anyways, if that's the case, because we need this. There's a sense of duty and right and wrong, and you had to sort of bear the torch on representing what had to happen. But to me, it seemed like there was a moment where you had to press into that. You kind of had to take the leap off the diving board. And for those maybe people who are at that point in their career that you were, that haven't taken that leap yet, what was the tipping point for you there that had you step off?
I think a lot of people equate it to confidence. And what I think is so ironic is, if you've been a founder before, you know that if anything, you're wrought with lack of confidence. You're always afraid, and you're always unsure, and you're going into an abyss, and you're trying to push and prove the way. And will this work? And can I do this? And am I the one to do this? Is I think a constant. So when people say, oh, it must have, taken a lot of confidence to say, make that initial decision. I actually think it's more about assessing risk, because if you assess risk and you know how to assess risk, you don't necessarily need the confidence trait to pull through or to lean into it, as you say, which is a great analogy, by the way. I think if you are on that diving board, you're looking around, is there water in the pool? And if so, how much? And it might be high, but how narrow is it, and how far away is the jump? And if you can take those facts and data, even if you're terrified, no matter how high that jump is, you've made a calculated assessment that it's okay to lean in, and what will be from there, You just have to have faith and trust that it will be. And so that kind of goes back to the eyes wide open, heart full, facts and data. And you brought up moral compass. I think it is an ethical aspect to the heart full part of that phrase, but I also think it's alignment. And I think when people are aligned with the core of who they are, and they know who they are, and they stay true to who they are with conviction, that shines in those moments of leaning in. And it's whether you're making relationships, it's whether you are networking, whether you are passing on referrals. The ability to live within one's own authenticity and be able to calculate and assess risks, I think, is what is that compelling interest, drive, and faith forward to lean into some of that. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but those are a couple of things that came to mind when you were asking it. It's a great analogy, though.
Love that. Thank you for sharing. Assessing risk as a skill set is key. I love that. The next moment you illuminated for us was a pivotal time where you were doing an integration with a firm out of Sweden. Your stepfather passed away. Your father was encountering challenges with his cancer treatments, two small ones at home, getting in the preparatory stages for an IPO, divorce, lots of environmental pressure. In hindsight, it's easy to pull out some cliche quote like, diamonds are made through pressure. But in the moment, like, as you say, you look back and you think that you don't know how you did not crack during all of that time. Could you sort of bring us into the headspace of the thinking rhythm in those days? Was it sort of just defaulting to discipline and sheer grit and determination? Was there a conscious sort of approach that you took to make it through? What was your perspective to go through to make it through that, Keri?
Honestly, I leaned into work as a sanctuary because it was the only place that I felt like I could control my environment. And as hard as some of the situations were with going through the IPO and the acquisition, I realized that it was the place that would hold the least amount of pain and drama. And so I think finding a place that was not even predictable, but finding a place that could kind of quiet the noise was really important. And it's also at the time where, on top of all of it, I started a journey of really paying attention to a physical self-care routine. And so I made it a point to get to the gym every day because I was absolutely needing an hour to myself where I was feeling strong and lifting weights, whatever it may be. But I knew that I was like in an isolated bubble where I could also quiet the noise. Even my own thoughts. And so it became a really sacred time for me. But I think that the idea that everybody, there's those sayings people say, you never know what somebody's going through, so be kind to them, so on and so forth. I didn't need kindness. I certainly didn't want pity. And I didn't feel or want to be identified as a victim. I remember when I started telling people about the divorce, they would say things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I would say, "No, congratulate." I know that doesn't sound like it's something you would normally say, but in certain situations, when you're making it one step at a time through every single day, and you're showing up the next day to do it again and again, in spite of all the things that are going on, I felt like congratulations was warranted. I was proud of myself for being able to show up every day in that full way. And I think what helped me feel that way I don't think I was aware of this at that time, but I think what helped me feel that way was what I call silver lining spotting. And I would look to connect the dots in either acts of kindness or in generosity and gratitude. And it wasn't conscious. I didn't have those words for it, but I would look to find the moments where somebody would drop off, dinner and leave it at the door with a kind note, or I would watch a kindness act of, through two strangers. I would seek to find the good and the light and the bright. And the more I could identify those, the more I could feel the little sparks of hope in my heart stay alive. And it didn't even have to be happening in my life. I just needed to observably find things that worked. And what happened then was some of the most ironic, call them serendipity, call them woo moments, started to occur. And these connections in my personal and work life that hadn't yet like either been there, transpired, I never would have made those connections before, they started to appear. And I started to meet certain people that would propel me forward to certain decisions or certain solutions or certain resources that I would have had no idea what or how to find. And so I think living with that sense of gratitude, looking for the silver linings in any situation, that was where my mentality was in that time. And the more that the momentum grew and every day turned into the next and every step forward was another step forward, it became this momentum of pure gratitude, peace, forgiveness, and grace for everything. And I think I made a very conscious decision where I said I would not live with stress, anger, vengeance, resentment to any, like I could have been really angry about, some of the, not being able to go see my dad as much during his chemo treatments because I was focused on IPO stuff. That was my decision, but I wasn't going to be mad at myself. I wasn't going to be mad at the company for going public. I wasn't going to be mad at my dad for chemo treatments. It had to be what it would be. So offering myself and the circumstance grace, anger for why does my dad have to have cancer? He was super healthy and it came out of nowhere for us. And letting go of any anger that might have. So making that conscientious choice and being filled with gratitude and looking for those silver linings are the things that I think in my headspace, to answer your question, were the things that really pulled me through. And I think back to the last conversation I had with my dad. I was now in my third company working through taking it public, and my dad was cleared. Then COVID happened, and then suddenly it came back after the holidays. And so I came back from hiking Machu Picchu, and I was on my way back from the airport, and he calls me. He says, "Are you sitting down?" And I was like, okay, he doesn't ask these kind of questions. And I was driving, but I knew he wouldn't tell me if I was driving sitting. So pulled over. Yes, Dad, I'm sitting down. He said, the cancer's back. I didn't want to tell you, didn't want to ruin your holidays. It's very aggressive. I don't know that you'll make the 10-day quarantine period, but I don't think I even have that much time left. And so thankfully he did make it. And in the last conversation with him, I asked him, so what do you regret most? And I wanted to take from that, what is the silver lining, something that I can learn from him that can give me hope to drive further decisions for the rest of my life. I don't want to be on my deathbed one day, which is inevitable for all of us, looking back and thinking I have X regret, right? And so asking him that, he said, I wish I had more time for things I don't have time for anymore. And that was eye-opening to me because I always knew I wanted to open my own firm. And this was an accelerant to that. I thought immediately, I need more time with my kids, because I knew ultimately that's what he meant. And I wanted work-life balance. And I knew opening my own firm would mean almost more work for another 5 years. But the sooner I started it, the sooner that, outcome could be there in the end. And so I shared this with them and I said, thank you for telling me that, because now it's inspired me to open the firm faster. And I said, I'm scared, I'm not ready, but I'm going to do it. So I appreciate you sharing that. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, Dad, I just told you I'm going to open the firm. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, Dad, it's HR. You know this. You're like my biggest career advocate. Like, are you okay? And he said, Keri, what do you want to do? And I just kept thinking about all the light that I had found along the way and all the experience I had and all of the things that I had learned throughout this process, personally or professionally. And I said, Dad, you know what I really want to do? If I have this light and I feel like I'm a flame and I have this fire in me, I want to take my torch and turn it and light others, so that when I'm in your position one day and I'm on my deathbed and I look back, I want to see a sea of flames. And that's how I know that I will have lived a life without regrets, and I will be in that position to be able to die in peace and put my head down on that pillow and exhale with a smile. And it was a beautiful conversation, but I think that has been a lot of the driving force, building on the loop story, building on some of those decisions. I think when you look for the light, either in yourself or in how to spark it in others, the momentum that comes with that and the authenticity that comes with that, the decision-making that comes with that, it's pretty powerful. It's pretty profound. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that is how I would sort of summarize some of those, thoughts at that time and that headspace, the mental space at the time.
A sea of flames. It's a beautiful analogy.
Inferno.
I love that. Love that. To recap some of the principles that you brought us through, we started with the sanctuary,
Mhm.
You found a place where you felt like you could have more control over your environment, and that in the midst of a really demanding time where environmental pressures were reaching extreme levels, and you found you firmly established a self-care routine grounded in training, where there was a time of the day that you could be disconnected, turn off your own thoughts, turn off the noise, and just kind of invest in yourself and your own well-being. I think those two things, that's really helpful tools to have in the inventory of a leader during really extreme moments. It's like, where's my sanctuary?
Mhm.
Where am I going? What place do I have that I can have some level of control over? And what does my grounding practice look like? Whether it's going to the gym, a meditation practice, hiking, or yoga. I think those two principles at the beginning are really powerful. I love what you said about silver lining spotting. And when oftentimes it's easy to fall into this like gray scale mentality when things are difficult and negative for a long period of time, to miss those moments of light. And I like that discipline and that practice of identifying the silver linings, the moments of to be grateful for, the moments of positivity, and hold on to those to generate the positive energy inside of yourself to fan the flame, so to speak. Um, I don't know if I characterized all of them, but I really loved uh, how you uh, took me through all of that, took us through that, and closed the loop. It was beautiful. Thank you.
I think the all of us taking it back to the entrepreneurial space, which was part of one of your questions before. Somebody is standing there and they don't know if it's time to jump or leap or step forward. What they often live in is a sense of fear. And the fear may be the unknown. The fear may be, am I enough? The fear may be their own loop. And I think things that are rooted in fear, when you are dealing with the unknown, or maybe it's not unknown. It was inevitable my dad was going to die. It was inevitable that, the divorce was happening. I was becoming a single mom. It was inevitable that I would be in a lot of pain going through 50-50 custody without my kids for the first time. I mean, it felt like I had lost all my limbs the first, it took a while to adjust to that. And going into it, that is going to be hard and scary, and you don't know how you're going to get from point A to point B. And not to minimize some of the bigger challenges that people go through in life, but entrepreneurship is not much different. You don't know every day what is ahead. You don't know how to answer every question. You don't know, you aren't the smartest in the room anymore. If anything, when you go on your own, you are a novice. And I think we go on a lot of hope and aspirations. And so some people might say, well, I'm really excited about this. So it's easy to, spot the silver linings. In some cases, I'm excited about going into entrepreneurship. I think the difference, and you mentioned the word control, you can't control what's going on around you. And that is also very, very true. You can't control it, but there's a difference in control and choice. You can't control, fix, or solve everything, but you can choose how you go into, through, and come out of them every single time. And so looking at the entrepreneurial aspect of business and tying all of this back to that, I would say that if anybody is afraid, good. If anybody is excited, good. If anybody has the hope and the grace and the fortitude to be able to take that leap or that step, keep going. Take it and just keep going. And you only have to take one day, one step at a time. And the only way that things fail is if you choose to give up. Otherwise, eyes wide open, heart full, even if it doesn't work, it's not a failure. And you might not be able to control that, but don't give up and don't stop moving forward.
I don't know if I could have landed the plane any better than that. As a fantastic summary, very encouraging. And you've brought us to the point where we're almost current day. I think we're probably planting the flag at the end of this conversation of close to the current state of historically what's brought you to where you're at now, leading your own firm, as we close up the conversation in the next several minutes, Keri, perhaps you could share a brief glimpse into what comes next on the journey. What are you looking forward to, and perhaps something we could pick up in our next conversation?
Yeah, so apparently I'm still taking those steps forward. Opened the firm and focused in on the investor, private equity, venture capital space as it relates to helping those firms work with their founders and their portcos on growing companies to scale. Essentially what I've done, wash, rinse, repeat. How can we do it? Lighting more torches, so to speak. How can we do it en masse? With that came the idea of a platform that is a SaaS-based software, 4-tier subscription infused with machine learning and AI, all the buzzwords, but ultimately it is enabling the process, the frameworks, and the decision-making that we would have made as advisors, and now putting that into the hands of the investors and the founders and owners to be able to sort of self-drive some of their decision assurance, the deal assurance, day one readiness. And I think that that in itself is something I'm excited about, but I also, it's not something, when I look back at the beginning of my career, I would never have thought I would be now opening a second company, a CEO and founder of a tech company, especially in AI. And so I think that, continuing to take those steps and going into the unknown, but doing it with, everything that I had just shared leading up to that point, it's the right decision. It's the right solution for the industry, and I will figure it out. It's still terrifying, but I'll figure it out, and I'm excited about that. There's also an initiative where we're pulling together a women in space charity that we are aiming to raise $25 million by the end of 2025 for in the 25th year anniversary of women going to space. And it is out there to spread the word and the mission of inclusion and inclusivity and what might be parts of our future globally, collectively. And so that is also a passion project of mine, and working with many wonderful people in the technology space, defense arena, to pull together many different sectors, whether it's public or private, government, logistical, medical, the ecosystem, the infrastructure of what's happening out on Space Coast, being able to drive a sense of community and belonging and support for all of the employees that are going to be going towards the Blue Origin, the SpaceX, and how can we make that community ready to take them and hold them and nourish and nurture them, so that way we can have this space exploration aspect of all of our futures and future generations continue. That is something else that, I didn't know much about space before this, but I think taking those steps forward, leaning off the different diving boards, as you will, those are two additional things that have come up since I opened the firm that I'm really excited about moving forward. So
very cool.
Yeah.
A lot more opportunities for discussion amongst those domains of exploration you're currently undertaking. Keri, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for your time and sharing your insights with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to continuing to share more and have the conversation continued.
Likewise. I'll see you in the next one.
All right, take care.